Hi everyone, Violet here, and I wanted to talk about a thing that you may have noticed. If you've ever gone to my Goodreads, you might notice that there's an author tag next to it, and also that there's a book or two books that are under my author section, and you're like, wait, is that you? And yeah, it is. So what happened with that, I guess? I'd like to talk about being an author, because I did, in fact, in 2022, release a novella, and I was a part of an anthology, and I want to talk about what happened with that, why I wrote it, and why I haven't written anything since. Part 1. Always a writer. So, it is very cliche to be like, I always wrote. From the time I came out of the cradle, I wrote books. But, I mean, that is somewhat accurate. I did write ever since I was pretty young. I was always coming up with stories. Some of them not uninspired by books I was reading. I was a very voracious reader as a child. And yeah, I mean, this affected a lot of my life. I ended up going to college as an English major. I took a lot of creative writing classes in college as well. So this was very much in my blood. The problem was that I wasn't really great at finishing things that were particularly long. I am someone who I describe myself as an additive writer. I will often write a thing and then I go back and I add more stuff because I've realized that I need to put more meat on the bones, as it were. Which meant that becoming a professional writer seemed kind of out of the cards, given the sort of length requirements that books normally have and stuff like that. But yeah, basically, that was going on. I graduated college in 2020. What a time to graduate college. Nothing interesting happened that year, right? Yeah, so there was a lot of time after that that I was just sort of not sure what I wanted to do. Sort of unclear. I ended up actually going to grad school online for information science, which for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically librarianship master's degree. But that didn't start till later in 2022. So there was a lot of time of just me kind of not knowing what I wanted to do with my life, trying to apply to jobs, trying to figure out what I wanted to pursue and all that jazz. But basically, I came across a woman, an author, romance author, named Tasha L. Harrison. She is a Black contemporary romance author, and she had started this event called 20K in 5 days. Part 2, Word Makers. So I think I was in my first 20K in 5 days in January of 2022, and I was this very shy, introverted, very nervous little 24? Yeah, I guess I was 24. And I was just not sure what I wanted to do. It was very scared, very quiet. They were all so nice though. Everyone in that group was nice. Word Makers, I will talk more about them as we go because a lot of this is in Word Makers. But I want to be very clear that the authors in Word Makers are some of the nicest, most helpful, genuine people I've ever had the pleasure of interacting with. They were so, so wonderful. And they were so welcoming to little baby, shy me. And I was like, I am probably not going to get through 20,000 words because I write short. I never finish things. It'll never happen. And yet somehow I got through 20,000 words in those 5 days. Now, those are, to date, some of the worst words I have ever written in my life. It is terrible. That writing, some of my worst. Without question, without fail. A lot of that was me writing in a caffeinated fugue state, which is the thing that happened every time I did the 20K in 5 days, but I mean, I did it, and I was shocked. I was like, oh my god, I could actually write long, which is a wild thing to realize, even if the actual words that were produced there were absolutely atrocious. So that was cool. I stayed in Word Makers, stayed hanging out with those people. So many wonderful people. God, at some point I should make a whole video just about how great a lot of these people are because they're just so nice and great and you should go read their books. And I can say that and also declare, I'm incredibly biased. Like, these are so wonderful. These people are so great. Anyway, so, word makers. I can write long. Who knew? Not me. Certainly not me. So, how did I end up writing this book? Well, this is sort of a roundabout thing. So we need to go to part 3, Violet Gaze Press. Violet Gaze Press was it was not a glamour publisher, but it was a small independent press that largely prided itself on works focused on marginalized people. There are a lot of stuff with like plus size individuals, marginalized races, I think some marginalized gender or sexual orientation, stuff like that. Most notable for this story is that they worked on a lot of anthologies that were centered around tropes. So there might be like a friends to lovers trope or enemies to lovers or billionaire or something like that. And so I believe this was maybe July or June of 2022. They announced that they were going to have a monster love anthology because this was like around the time when monster romance really started to take off. And so, yeah, they put out the call for monster romance stuff. And I did not sign up for it. I didn't even bother. I didn't submit at all. But a lot of people in Wordmakers, which, have I described what Wordmakers is? God, I'm sorry. I'm a mess. Wordmakers was basically created by Tasha L. Harrison, and it was created to be a space where authors would focus on writing specifically. Like, not necessarily marketing or whatever, because, like, those conversations came up. It was mostly about, like, getting the word volume done so you could move on to the other elements of it. And it largely had, I think most of the people involved were Black romance authors, and there were definitely other people involved with it as well, including one who will come up later. So basically, a lot of the Wordmakers authors had submitted and gotten accepted into the Monster Love Anthology, which is great, right? What could go wrong? Well, Violet Gaze Press, like, imploded in like a couple months after they'd like gotten through all their submissions and stuff. I don't entirely remember all of the details about this. A lot of this is hearsay shenanigans. I believe, allegedly, there was something about pushing out some of the more marginalized authors, making them feel bad or villainizing them. There was also, I think, some like financial stuff, like they allegedly, do not sue me, whoever even ran it, now a defunct company, were like not great about getting payments and royalties out to people. You know, the sort of things that you should really be good at as a publisher. So they fell apart. And suddenly, there were all of these authors and word makers who had these monster romance stories that didn't have a home anymore. So what on earth are we to do? Something must be done. Part 4, the Uncanny Society. So, a group of people led by Coralie Moss and Joe West, he ended up not... he did not end up releasing his story in the series, but he kind of came up with the sort of thread that would tie it all together, which was basically that the Uncanny Society was this group of like monster researchers. And so that was like the through line to sort of connect these stories together. And I did not submit a story for this either. I was like, well, I can maybe help you guys with like a series Bible so that you guys can have like little things that can connect the stories together if you all want to, like add more details to make them all cohesive and like link up more. Because everyone was going to be releasing them on their own. They were not going to be like a bind up anymore, but they were going to, there's like a website that probably still exists. If so, I'll put it in the description, I guess, with like the inherent caveat that I am biased towards liking these because I was a part of this, but hey, if you wanted some monster novellas, then like I will see if I can find it and put in the chat. Or the comments. Not the comments, the description of the video. Gracious. So yeah. So I was just like, I can help you guys with the series Bible, and they're like, oh my god, that's so great, thanks, you know. And so I did that, and then I had an idea. And I was like, well, what if there was like a website for the Uncanny Society? And I was thinking like old school, like early 2000s website with like really chunky layout design and a lot of message boards and stuff. And, well, no one else was going to write that. So I was like, well, okay, I started it, and I was getting through a lot of traction on it. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to see if I can get to 5,000 words by the end of this week. Then I'm going to ask Coralie Moss if I can join. And the reason I gave myself the 5K word limit is because these stories, I believe, are supposed to range between 12 and 22,000 words. And so my thought was, if I get to 5,000 by the end of the week, then I will be almost halfway there, right? So I did that, and I asked her, expecting her to say no, and she said, oh my God, of course! So, yeah. So that was, I think, October or November of 2022. And suddenly, I was going to be releasing a book. Part 5, what a lovely sight. Okay, I have one piece of advice for you. If you are going to write a romance, your first romance, do not make it poly, okay? And I will tell you why. Because the thing is, when you are writing a romantic relationship between two people, you only have one relationship you need to track the arc of. And that is person A to person B. When you add more people in, that gets way more complicated. Because see, when you have 3 people, like I ended up landing with, you have person A to person B to person C, person A to person C, and then all of them together. So you go from like 1 relationship to track to 4, which was maybe a touch ambitious for a novella, and perhaps contributed to the fact that by the time I finished, this story that should have been at max 22,000 words was 29,000. Which I was shocked by, because again, I write short. There's no way I would ever go past this, right? No, that's absurd. But no, it did happen. It did happen. No one stopped me though. No one told me no. They were like, fine, cool, amazing. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So that came out March 24th, 2022. Which I do love. March, I think the reason I picked March 24th was because 3 to 4 adds up to 9, and 9 is like one of my favorite numbers because it's like all the multiples of it are like divisible by its. Yeah. I have a thing about that. Like, it's one of those things where you can add up all the number. It's the only number, I think, where if you add up all the things and they equal 9, it is divisible by 9. I'm a nerd, in case you weren't aware. So, yes, I did release my book on a date divisible by 9 because, yeah. I will jump ahead a little bit and say that I also released a story in an anthology. It was a charity anthology, and you can't get it anymore. I'm very sorry. It was called The New Year at the Hotel d'Amour. It was basically this sweet romance anthology set on New Year's Eve at a really glitzy hotel in the Swiss Alps. And once again, I was like series Bibling it, and I was like, hey, it would be kind of fun if like a set piece of the night is like this masquerade ball. And that's what my story ended up being about. At some point, I should put that somewhere so people who are curious can access it, because it's like gone now again, as I said. This was a charity anthology. It was like I think we sold it through like April maybe of 2023, and then it was like pulled. So yeah, that happened. And I had a great time with that one, and I had all of these plans. What a Lovely Sight was supposed to be the start of this like paranormal romance series, and the Hotel d'Amour short was like supposed to be this like kickoff to this series about this like dysfunctional spy family. And then those never came out. So like what happened? Part 6. So what happened? So like, here's the thing. I had some realizations over this like wild sort of 2 years of my life. The thing is, like, I love writing. I love creating things. I love coming up with stuff. And I hated being an author. Advertising in particular was basically like pulling teeth for me. Anytime I had to post about the thing that I wrote, I wanted to die. And then thinking about like planning for the future and how are we going to connect things and how are you going to advertise it and how are you going to like plan for the future. And oh my God, it was so bad. I hated doing all of that. Like, it was so unpleasant for me specifically. And so I just sort of stopped. And the thing is, like, you might ask, oh, well, maybe you should try traditional publishing. The thing is, traditional publishing isn't much better. Querying, God, no, even people who do trad pub talk about how awful querying is. Traditional publishing. People who say that, like, hate querying. Querying's bad. But also, I was writing, like, weird little queer novellas, and, like, novellas are not a thing you query in general. Like, it was not gonna work out. Basically, I think what started to happen for me is that it began to feel like a job, and not a job I really wanted to do because it was like a hobby for me before, and it started to feel like really commercial for me, and it was just really not fun anymore. It's funny, this sort of happened to my sister as well. My sister actually played professional rugby because she played it in college and then continued to play it post-college. And basically what happened in the past year or so is that a lot of money actually started getting put into women's rugby. So the sort of range to play professionally expanded a lot, which is how she ended up doing it. And she said, I'm on the one hand, I'm really happy that professional rugby women's professional rugby has money. It means people really care and are invested in the sport. But the vibes changed when people were no longer just doing it for fun. They were doing it for money, because we can't decommercialize our brains enough, I think is the thing. So she did her last season was like fully as a professional rugby player, and then she ended up retiring. It just wasn't for her. That was not her main job. She still has her main job and all that jazz. So like, don't worry about her financially. She's fine. But yeah, that's sort of what happened to me with writing, is that I just started to feel like the joy of it was just sort of not there anymore. And it was a thing I was really worried about. I wanted to be a hobby writer and not a professional writer. And over the course of both of these, I started to feel more and more like a professional writer, which was not really what was bringing me joy. So I stopped. Yeah. That being said, I think this sounds like oh wow, you hated every moment of it. No, I did not. I don't regret doing this. I think it was actually kind of important to see if I could do it. And I, again, met so many wonderful people. I feel like I learned so much about the industry, and just had a really fun time. Honestly, like, just for the fact of getting to meet and connect with so many different romance authors, and who at some point I will finally get my butt to a romance convention and be able to see you guys in person and like take pictures and talk about how great you guys are. I don't regret doing this, if only to see that I could do it, I remember, I think this was sometime last year, I like checked Amazon's like tracking of like the sales of the book. And I did release it wide. It wasn't like a KU thing or anything. But I realized that I somehow had sold 100 copies of What a Lovely Sight. And I get that that is not a lot of sales to most people. But that was a number I didn't even think would have been possible for me with this little weird baby book that like I love but is deeply flawed, and like people across the world outside of my scope at that amount of people, like completely outside of my scope, saw this blurb and saw this book with this like chinky little bat on the cover and decided to give it a chance. that's wild to me. And I'm really proud of the fact that that happened, even if it's not a thing I want to continue doing. I don't know. At some point, I think I'd like to start writing and putting work out again, but probably not in that vein. I think maybe it's just the sort of form that I really didn't like doing, and not just like the actual writing of it. So yeah, that was my writing journey. And I wanted to say this because I know that there's definitely a tension, I think, with authors in reviewer spaces. So I wanted to be clear that, like, yes, I did write books, but no, I'm not currently like an active author. I'm pretty firmly retired. And also, on a related note, given the fact that this did happen, if for some godforsaken reason you listened to this video and thought it was an advertisement for this book, which it's not, like, I had to describe what it was to some extent, but it really isn't. This was not a, like, go buy my book. If you want to, you can. But if you do, for some reason, buy it, and you read it, and you hate it, and you think it's the worst thing ever written, that's totally fine. I have thick skin, okay? I'm not gonna be one of those weird people who's like, how dare you hate my book? It was my blood, sweat, and tears went into this, and you're hit. Like, no, that's a lot, okay? Like, the thing about books is that they are like baby birds, you know? Once they leave the nest, they're not yours anymore. You love them from afar. And that is how I feel about this book. So, like, if you hate it, totally fine. My only request is that you don't tell me directly about it. Like, feel free to hate it anywhere else. Just don't come up to me or be in my mentions and be like, this was the worst thing I've ever written. Like, that's fine. Feel that way. Just don't tell me. I think that's fair, right? I think that's valid. So yeah, I just wanted to talk about this, get it off my chest, put it out into the world, and, talk about books again, because books are great, and I love them dearly, and I love talking about books, and I want to talk about them more with you guys. So yeah, thank you all so much for listening to this ramble situation, and I will talk to you later. Bye!